This is Seymour Rocks reporting from Down Under. I just want to share something um, that's come across in the headlines. It's very, very seriously, but I just want to point your attention to this. First of all, it's an interview that Vladimir Putin has done with the Financial Times of London, where he's been far more forthcoming than at any time before. So I'll leave that with you. But this was really what I wanted to talk about. This is from Zero Hedge, but I'll take the article from Hal Turner. Um, so his conclusions are almost diametrically opposed to mine, but at least he is talking about this and he's sort of accurate on many levels. So anyway, this is very serious, folks. With the world waiting for the first headlines from the Trump-Xi meeting, the most important and unexpected news of the day hit moments ago when Europe announced that the special trade channel, INSTEX, that would allow European firms to avoid SWIFT and bypass American sanctions on Iran, is now operational. Following a meeting between the countries who signed the Iran nuclear deal, also known as the JCPOA, which was ditched by the US, French, British, and German officials. Wait a minute. Yeah, sorry, I'll read that again. Now I've got it. Following a meeting between the countries who signed the Iran nuclear deal, which was ditched by the US, French, British, and German officials said that the trade mechanism which was proposed last summer and called INSTEX is now operational. As a reminder, last September, in order to maintain a financial relationship with Iran that can not be vetoed by the US, Europe unveiled a special purpose vehicle to bypass SWIFT. And if you recall, SWIFT was the mechanism that under Obama they really hit the Iranians the last time it looked as though they were going to go to war. The mechanism would facilitate transactions between European and Iranian companies while preventing the US from vetoing the transactions and pursuing punitive measures on those companies and states that defied Trump. The payment balancing system will allow companies in Europe to buy Iranian goods and vice versa without actual money transfers between European and Iranian banks. The statement came after the remaining signatories of JCPOA gathered in Vienna for a meeting that Iranian Ministry spokesman Abbas Mousavi called the last chance for the remaining parties to gather and see how they can meet their commitments towards Iran. Until today, Iran was skeptical about the EU's commitment to the deal and threatened to exceed the maximum amount of enriched uranium allowed it by the deal after the US had imposed a series of sanctions on the country. Meanwhile, opponents of INSTEX, almost exclusively the United States, have argued that the mechanism is flawed because the Iranian institution designated to work with INSTEX, the special trade and financial instrument, has shareholders with links to entities already facing sanctions from the US. The announcement will likely send President Trump off the rails, because in late May, Bloomberg reported that as part of Trump's escalating battle with European allies over the fate of the Iran nuclear accord, he was threatening penalties against the financial body created by Germany, the UK, and France to shield trade with the Islamic Republic from US sanctions, including loss of access to the US financial market. According to Bloomberg, the Treasury Department's Undersecretary for Terrorism and Financial Intelligence, Sigal Mandilka, sent a letter on May the 7th warning that INSTEX, the European SPV, to sustain trade with Tehran and anyone associated with it could be barred from the US financial system if it goes into effect. I urge you to carefully consider the potential sanctions exposure of INSTEX, Mandilka wrote in an ominous letter to INSTEX President Per Fischer. Engaging in activities that run afoul of US sanctions can result in severe consequences, including a loss of access to the US financial system. Germany, France, and the UK finalised the INSTEX system in January, allowing companies to trade with Iran without the use of US dollars or American banks, allowing them to get around wide-ranging US sanctions that were imposed after the Trump administration abandoned the 2015 Iran nuclear deal last year. This was a shot across the bow of a European political establishment committed to using INSTEX and its sanctions-connected Iranian counterpart to circumvent US measures, said Mark Dubovitz, the Chief Executive Officer of the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies in Washington. Here is a simpler summary of what just happened. This was the first official shot across the bow of the US dollar status as a global reserve currency, and not by America's adversaries, but by its closest allies. And once those who benefit the most from the status quo openly revolt against it, the countdown to the end of the US dollar reserve status officially begins. When asked to comment on the letter, the Treasury Department issued a statement saying entities that transact and trade with the Iranian regime through any means may expose themselves to considerable sanctions risk, and Treasury intends to aggressively enforce our authorities. The US ire was sparked by the realization and alarm that cracks are appearing in the dollar's reserve status. Opponents of INSTEX argue, at least for public consumption purposes, that the mechanism is flawed because the Iranian institution designated to work with INSTEX, the special trade and financial instrument, has shareholders with links to entities already facing sanctions from the US. Separately, during a visit to London on May the 8th, Pompeo warned that there was no need for INSTEX because the US allows for humanitarian and medical products to get into Iran without sanction. Really? First I've heard of that. This guy lies for a living. When transactions move beyond that, it doesn't matter what vehicle's out there. If the transaction is sanctionable, we will evaluate it, review it, and if appropriate, levy sanctions against those who were involved in that transaction. Pompeo said it's very straightforward. In other words, the bully will just sanction anyone who disagrees with him. In conclusion, 1 month ago we said that in 2018 Europe made a huge stink about not being bound by Trump's unilateral breach of the Iranian deal, and said it would continue regardless of US threats. But now that the threats have clearly escalated and Washington has made it clear that it won't take no for an answer, it will be interesting to see if Europe's resolve to take on Trump, especially in the light of the trade war with China, has fizzled. The answer, it appears, is that Europe felt unexpectedly emboldened just hours before Trump's meeting with Xi, and that it is ready and willing to call Trump's bluff. It goes without saying that if the US does indeed retaliate and proceed with sanctions against European banks, then the global trade war is about to turn far, far uglier. And I couldn't disagree with that. And late breaking update, Europe has told the US Treasury that if the United States begins sanctioning any European country or or company over Iran trade, European entities will withdraw their funds from US banks and financial markets, sending certain banks into collapse immediately. So this, folks, is very, very serious unless someone backs down. But that's enough from me. It's a Seymour Rocks reporting from down under.